Hello and welcome. The finance function is changing and changing quite dramatically as the world itself becomes more complex. What we assumed was the nature of flows, particularly cross-border, is no longer the case. Supply chains are becoming more complex and more challenging, and business models are changing, and sometimes so dramatically that businesses can disappear overnight. So let's find out how CFOs are responding to this, and more importantly, how should they be responding to this today and tomorrow. I'm joined by a very exciting and learned panel of guests from all over the world, and let's try and understand how not just finance, but even the word accounting has changed. And who better to put that question to than Robert, who heads ACCA. So Robert, tell us, when we think of accountants, we have a certain image in our minds, and to what extent does that image even hold good today?
I don't think the image does hold good today. So if you ask for the translation of accountant in many languages, it purely means bookkeeper, and the days of bookkeeping are gone. Okay. However, we need to make sure that our finance professionals are appropriately trained and are ready for the challenges that we're facing, the challenges of digitalization, the challenges of increased regulation and governance pressures, the challenges associated with globalization and connectivity, and most importantly, the challenges associated with increased public interest, the public interest role that the finance professionals face, the CFO faces, and accountability for climate-related issues associated with the business, for example.
So how many of these issues are new, as in how many of these, including climate, have become critical in, let's say, the last 5 years, as opposed to maybe the previous 10?
Certainly the drive with regards to digitization. The challenge to the public interest role of the profession has always been there. We just have different nuances, I believe. But the globalization aspects have definitely been enhanced by connectivity and the pervasiveness and different methods of communication. The public interest role, I think, is a growing movement, and we are seeing protests around the world and challenges to the fairness and about how wealth is created.
So the changes that are therefore the outcome of all these trends and developments is something that must be placing a lot of pressure on CFOs and of course companies themselves. In your mind, as we launch into the discussion, how has the CFO community responded to these challenges?
Well, I think we've seen a real positive change, in fact, that many CFOs are driving the digitization agenda, and therefore they're operating stewardship over many more data sets that are peripheral to finance. That also drives the ethical responsibilities of communicating those data sets to internal stakeholders and external stakeholders fairly and transparency, and that's a huge role.
Right. Okay, let me get some more of you, Sachin. So what's your sense? I mean, what has changed critically in the last 5 years, which we should be aware of, and in also a reflection of how the world at large is changing and the speed at which it is changing?
We did a survey of 817 odd finance executives around the world, out of which 12% were from India as well. 84% of such finance executives kept digitization as one of the topmost priorities. So, in my view, in our view, the whole digitization is the single largest priority for the whole finance executives. One thing what they've started with is automating their processes. One thing which CFOs really embraced in India is about implementing robotics around it. They gone with the time they were accountants who were processing invoices. I'll take this example of a large media organization where this finance organization, CFO reached out to us saying how you can automate my release order processing. They had 25 odd executives who has been working on a day in day out basis, and the 15
what media guys call the RO, right?
RO, yes, yeah. There you go, absolutely, and you know that, right? And it may be prone to certain error, and there are executives who will have average handling time of 25 to 30 minutes, and now we built a bot over a period of time, working closely with them, integrating with them, and hey, the average processing time went down by 75%. The staff which was involved were then into more productive, more strategic jobs. So automation of the entire finance processes, whether it is bank reconciliation, invoice processing, so on and so forth, is one area which I think finance executives have really embraced.
Right, and I'm sure that flows up, right, whether it's the time freed up or the strategic flows up, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Arnab, tell us about your company. I mean, and what do you do, and how has that changed in the last 5 years, I mean, and beyond?
say I work for a traditional manufacturing company and we are in a very traditional commodity power. And when you are in that kind of a commodity, the business model earlier used to be a large scale contracts, getting into the government organizations, very traditional way of selling. Nowadays what we sell is mostly digitized product. Every machine, every equipment which we sell is mostly fitted with a sensor which can communicate. So the way the business models are working is the machine communicates, then the machine gets into a set of machines which starts communicating through a SCADA or a DMS layer, and then you pick up analytics from that machine and then you can do different level of analytics. So this is also changing the business model, the way you are contracting, the way you are solving the customer's problem. So if you translate this now into a finance function, the traditional finance function is changing. Earlier pretty much we used to end our jobs in either a transactional processing, an APAR or a reporting function. Now if you see, I mean, we are deriving more and more data from the machines and trying to do the analytics, we are trying to explain the levers of efficiency. So the business models are fast changing.
Right, and you talked about contracting. So what you're saying is you also have now, like other companies who are in your peer group, more long-term relationships and continuous relationships with your clients as opposed to selling either an engine or some other component and then forgetting about it. Absolutely. Or turning up once a year for servicing.
Absolutely. So now the contracts are becoming more and more engaged. You are participating in performance levels in many way or the other. It's still an initial stage, I would say, but it is fast picking up. So you are basically getting into a longer term relation where you are selling the equipments, you are monitoring the performance of the equipments, you are trying to solve a customer issue, and then the contracts have to be done accordingly. So that's creating, I mean, if you ask me from a CFO perspective, the skill set of the team is always in a change. You need probably people with good contracting skill, good commercial skills. So we are doing a lot of investment on those areas.
And would you say that most of the changes that have happened in your team have happened in the last few years compared to, let's say, the previous 10?
I would say last
in the composition,
last 5 years, particularly in the last 2 years. And as we speak, I have engineers who are reporting in my team. I wouldn't have imagined it a few years back, but now I have engineers in my team who are reporting. And more as we are expanding our factory footprints, those are this kind of resources with analytical skills who understands the product is becoming a very valuable finance resource.
Right. Rajesh, tell us about what you do and how is the function and in the specific sense and the broader sense changing or has changed in the last few years?
No, so as I was saying that we are a brick and mortar company and we are a FMCG company, and so we are not like an engineering company. What you just said, but I think some of the changes that is happening in the last 4 or 5 years, I think no organization is remain unimpacted, and we are not also unimpacted, and especially the way the exponentially the data has increased, the low cost of data processing, very high data processing power. And more importantly, that cloud computing and the algorithm that plays a role. So these 4 and 5 things that the way exponentially it has undergone a change in last 4 or 5 years, it has an impact everywhere and it has impact on us also.
Give us an example of how it's been happening. I mean, we all know Seagram, but tell us about how.
So on looking at from our perspective, we are using this mega change to see that how do I create a value in the organization, okay? And for any FMCG company, I think today CFOs are into the zone where he has to ask a question whether first you focus on the finance or you first focus on the rest of the function, okay? And probably in a Seagram, I think and Pandurika, our focus is other way around. First we are saying that let's try and create a value other than finance. First try and create a value for the sales, for the manufacturing, for the supply chain and marketing. And to give an example, for example, what you were just talking about, the automation. So where we are using this technology and we are doing a kind of a scanning of the entire organization and trying to see that in today's time where the compliances and reporting and so on and so forth has gone so many-fold, where a lot of sales people and the marketing people and the operations people have to spend their time in doing all this administrative work. So how do you can use an automation where all these things get automated and where these people did not spend time on those kind of work, and where the time that you free up that gets devoted into the business.
So has this meant, for instance, faster processing of product, or I mean, has it moved faster movement through supply chains? What's changed?
So fundamentally, I would not say that we have changed, but we are in that process. First, we are saying that everything that the organization does, doesn't matter is a sales or marketing or a supply chain, which is of a repetitive in nature and doesn't require a human judgment, need not to be done by human. Let's put it this way. And if we succeed,
are you surprised when you see when you come up with newer applications when you can substitute machine for man?
So the biggest surprise part is in the adoption, because it's good to say that you can develop the solutions, but when actually this needs to get adopted, then you are into the zone when you realize that probably you need a different kind of a skill set to get fully adopted, number one. Number two, I think one of the mistakes that gets done is that when you go for an automation, you think of a problem, you think of a solution and do automation. You don't think that this automation is actually fitting into my operating model or not. And therefore, when you do not think first that whether your operating model has to undergo a change, and you try and develop an automation, and then when you go and try to apply it, you end for a massive surprise. So personally, if you ask me, and this applies a lot to the large brick and mortar companies where you are into a very fast paced environment. There's no time to relook your operating model and change operating model and reinvent productivity and the processes. But you see the problem, you know that automation is available, technology is cheap and so on and so forth. You develop automation. When you try and to go and implement it, then you realize that this model is actually not fitting into your operating model, and this operating model has to undergo a change, or the people through which you need to operate, their skill set has to be different than what it is today. So that's why I always say that before you embark a digitization journey, it's very important to see that my digitization piece, that whatever I do, does it really require me to develop a new operating model? Does it require to have me a new skill set or a new structure? Yes or no, first do this and then go into
and I would say that chimes with our research, which shows that it's very difficult to automate out a whole process. You can only generally automate out a section of it, and you will need human interventions. And naturally, those human interventions will need to be done by different types of people with different skill sets and multi-talented people. So making sure that we have those people within the finance function is essential. The other bit around it is that I think that one of the real challenges is taking responsibility for the robotic process automation, because it's not a one and done thing. It's setting this thing loose. It has to be updated, monitored, and that's another different skill set which core finance professionals maybe don't have.
But do you feel that people are putting in the effort to do so, or as he pointed out, things can go wrong because maybe you've put the horse before the cart?
Well, I think that's the learning process, and any transformation is a learning process. So
I think just to complement, I think every organization, we are in that journey at different stages. One of the points which I have seen in my experience is that the structuring of the data is becoming very important, especially with technologies like blockchain and other coming. See, you can customize the basic ERP only up to a certain point. Then you take it something which we loosely call a middleware, and then you are doing the slicing and the dicing of the data, because the business these days wants to look at the data in different dimensions. There's a segment dimension, a product dimension, a geography dimension. So the multi-dimensional data is becoming a reality of the finance function. And how you parameterize those data, how you are having a business intelligence software which can then dovetail within AI and give you different kind of analytics. I think planning of the data becomes very important.
And this is where, and are you also saying that this is where mistakes could be made?
This is where mistakes.
Because you're also trying to learn so fast, and maybe you've got competitive pressure too.
Absolutely, and I think, but in reality, most of the organizations, what they're doing is they're going module by module. I think that's, in my view, the right way to do it. Take it in bite-sized chunk, but then have an architecture where you can integrate the whole thing. And the vision should be clear where you are going. Right.
And we'll come back to digitization. Sachin, talk about regulation. I mean, what's the kind of regulatory changes that we are have seen, and what's the kind of pressure it's putting on CFOs today?
In my mind, Govind, and excuse me for that, today to me, CFO is also under the gun. Why I say this is, Friday, Honorable Finance Minister announced the tax cuts. I am sure both of my learned friends would have gone into their, I am sure their global organization would have asked, okay, what is the new cash flow looking like? Because it came as a surprise, right? And it is not only the one. I mean, there are changes in GST which is happening, there are changes on accounting standards which is happening, there is NEFRA which is being set up. I think regulation, and not only that, if you look at today, the whole social media, I mean, it is a very distributed model. Something goes wrong in some far-flung parts of India and goes posted on a social media, and suddenly there are summons coming to the directors, CFO. It's becoming more and more in this distributed model, that how sitting in a cyber city office that you are having a track of what is happening around India. And I think some of the leading finance organizations have really mastered the art. I can very quickly give you an example of a large hospitality chain with upwards of 100 odd hotels, and they really need to think about kitchen, security, housekeeping, so on and so forth, right? And they have a very robust model of how they look at the controls and how they report it, and the finance function do it on an automated way. And there are those individuals who will.
And you're saying that's different from what was happening earlier, or?
So, in this particular organization, it was always happening, but it was now automated. Now, somebody sitting in finance can actually view it, how this particular function is moving, what are the score looking like in this particular hotel. So, but having said this, I think the rollout of such programs of monitoring these compliances and having self-assessment of these compliances and regulations is changing the finance function, given that it's so distributed as a model.
So Rajesh, how do you keep abreast? I mean, when things might come flying from different directions, and good news and not so good news. So how do you stay abreast and respond?
No, so as you know that we are an alcoholic beverage company, and in India it's a very different ball game to become to be alcoholic beverage company, because you are regulated very heavily that anyone can even think of and taxed of course very heavily. But it also I think I see a positive side of it. Okay, is that it helps us to remain agile all the time. So our business model is such, and the way our business gets developed is that you respond immediately, because we work in an industry where the regulation change happened yesterday night and you need to be compliant by tomorrow morning. That's the way. That's the pace that it changes. And that's the way I always see a positive side of it, that it keeps organization on the toes. But if your question is that does it really impacts us, or does it really puts any additional pressure on us, or does it really change finance function, I would say no, because at least personally I'm very clear that why do I exist in the organization. I'm very clear.
To manage the chaos.
No, the fundamental role of a CFO is to create a sustainable value in an ethical way, on a sustainable basis. That's the fundamental job for CFO. I'm very fortunate that I'm part of the organization which believes in this. So where the ethics is a core to us. So anything that changes in the external environment, yes, it puts some pressure, because if you have a more regulation that you have to comply more. But does it really change anything in terms of organizational way of working and responding? I would say no.
Okay.
I think it does bring ethical challenges, though. We talked about a multi-dimensional data set. Okay, you change the regulation, you look at the data set a different way, you may see something that's very ugly. As a steward for that data set, it's your responsibility to inform the business and potentially other stakeholders, and that puts huge pressure, because actually that may not be good news. And also, in increased regulation, what is relevant yesterday may not be relevant today, and you may be capturing data that actually is extremely relevant to future regulation. So being a steward for a multi-dimensional data set brings huge responsibilities and huge risks that we haven't seen before. And
you've sort of reinforced this point now, and you're doing it because you've seen something going wrong.
Well, I think well, I think the challenges, and I go back to the climate aspect of it, is and responsibility, that we've seen huge changes in public views around different products. Some of the products that we're talking about here, the public view of them has changed significantly. So naturally, that data will either exist or not exist. But actually, that's one of the challenges that the CFO faces in their enhanced role. So I think it's only just what is important, I think, is making sure that when collective judgments are made in the business, that the CFO is core to them, and there's a bit of responsibility about recording those judgments too, because the judgment today may have been totally acceptable, but as public views change in the future, it maybe not be justified in 2 years' time.
Right.
And just building on the point what Richard said, I mean, if you see in our lifetime as finance professionals, we have seen one of the biggest transformation, which is GST. And the way in the form in which it has been implemented in India, your suppliers and customers are completely integrated to to the point he was making, that today if you make any judgment in the value chain and you are breaking the value chain, it's all in the system. So one needs to be really cohesive in how you are integrating the whole value chain.
And what do rate changes mean to you? As in, does that involve a lot of work finding patches for your ERP systems and so on?
Not really. There was initial struggle definitely when GST came in, but now most of the ERPs, they have come up with the patches. So today as we speak, it is more stabilized, but yes, initially for
and as rates change, you feel that's not something
that's not something which is very difficult to manage.
Right. Okay, so let's talk about pressure from the external world. Stakeholders, shareholders, seeking more transparency, asking more questions. How is the CFO community or companies at large responding, Rajesh?
So, Govind, the thing is, earlier whenever there used to be a board meeting or sort of an earning call, I think what we used to see in the finance function, last 1 week there are data which is coming from here, there are Excel sheets being prepared, there are changes being made. I think more and more the CFOs are getting away from that. The CFOs have started relying on digital dashboards. First of all, I really appreciate what Arnab made as a point, whole the data governance, and I'll add the data lake later to it, but having one truth of the data and having one dashboard around that, and these interactive dashboards is helping them, giving a very live feed in terms of what is really happening. I think as stakeholders are asking for more of these data, today's CFO of the leading organization have started digitizing those data sets. I think any CFO is relying on Excel, so have started relying less and less now, and especially for the critical part of it, and hence they are becoming more and more easy to replying to these stakeholders.
Right. So Sachin, would you say that, let's say if you look at the top 100 companies on the Bombay Stock Exchange, would you say all of them today fit with most of the principles or follow most of the principles that we've been talking about today?
I think that's a difficult question for me to answer.
That we get a sense of what the journey ahead is, because here we have some of the biggest companies who are also multinational.
Absolutely.
So maybe they're right on the top of the...
They are. I think some of them have been really up there and they are really changing the game. They have implemented dashboards. They've gone ahead and implemented artificial intelligence. See, when we spoke about data governance, these leading companies have started taking the help of unstructured data, emails, call recordings, audio visual. They have started putting that and put that in data lake. How you can actually, so for example, you have got thousands of service centers, 1,000+ service centers across India, and for which you have to rate the health of the service center. And the rate of the service center is not rated based on the debits and based on the customer service, but a lot of the social media feed and a lot of emails and a lot of AVs which are going through, and these are all coming through data lakes. So I think these are the changes which we are seeing in the whole CFO function.
Right.
To your point on the listed companies, since I represent a listed company, I think probably the challenge for the CFO today is the consistency of your plan, not more on what you report, that's kind of a given, but you are questioned by the investors on the consistency of your plan, because every word you say in the transcript is recorded, it's available in the stock exchange, and quarter on quarter, 6 quarters, 8 quarters down the line, whatever you have communicated, how consistent you are, that's the challenge. So CFOs are more and more now driving the business from that perspective, being accountable and to the market, being the face to the market. So that's how the role is changing.
Okay, and how would you look at it, Rajesh? I mean, when you look at external pressure, and you too have a lot of external pressure, maybe not you specifically as a company, but definitely as an industry, and that's something that you have to grapple with all the time.
Yes, so I mean, as you know, that we are not listed in India, but anyway, we are a multinational corporation and listed in France. So for us, if you say that has really anything undergone a change, I would say not much. Probably because anyway we are IFRS compliant, IFRS was applying to us, and therefore does really something change for us? I wouldn't say much. India coming to IFRS actually eases work for us because then duplication has stopped, let me put it this way. And personally, if you ask me from my perspective, it is always a good sign that you have more and more transparency information available, because that is helping to build credibility into your organization, and you are serving the stakeholder the way you need to serve. So from my perspective, I always see as a very, very positive development that actually India as a country is moving in a direction where more and more transparency is coming into a financial statement, where if anyone can read it, he can really rely on it, what is being presented for there. So
right. And Robert, how are you seeing the IFRS journey today, and particularly from India point or vantage point?
Well, I think it's very positive. I would say that ACCA as a global organisation is a very strong supporter of global standards. And actually, global standards and digitization play hand in hand, because actually the more ad hoc scenarios you have, the more country-specific details, the less transparent the data gets, the less easy it is to combine and consolidate, and the less easy it is to see a global picture. So actually we should be seeing a drive to, or a further drive to common standards. It should bring more countries online. Talking the common language of finance means trade's easier. So from my perspective, it's a win-win.
Okay. Let me come back to you, Sachin. So the other point is that as you get more accountable, and you also spend a lot of time on it, right? So managing the external and the internal is perhaps one of the key, let's say, challenges for a CFO, and more so because a CFO also is now trying to learn new skills and stay abreast. We've talked about digitization. How do you see the community managing this triumvirate of challenges?
I think it's fairly challenging in managing such challenges, but they are really learning very fast. Again, I take this example of you will not associate CFOs, or finance organization getting into what social media much about it is and what does it mean for an organization. And for one of the leading car manufacturer, they believe that social media is an important. Yes, they were already working on it. There was marketing function and social media organization. But they realize that 2 out of 3 car buyers today go first decide on social media and then they go and buy it. So they said, okay, why don't we review this, look at what it comes out and what are the learnings from here which can be implemented. So I have seen, yes, to answer your question, it is very challenging because these are not taught in ACCA courses, right? I mean, yet,
yeah,
and hopefully we should.
And you might belong to a generation which you're not even maybe on Facebook or something, yeah.
But,
yeah.
Okay, the most important thing is that we do, for example, have data analytics. We do consider AI. We do consider ethics in an automated world. And we talked about how accountancy is changing. So the accounting qualification, whether you call it accounting anymore, well, certainly the ACCA one is changing, because our job is to keep our members and our students relevant so they can do the jobs that everybody wants them to do.
And that's how we have many ACCAs with us in our organization as well. I think, so that's how the whole accounting world is changing, the CFO world is changing. They're learning these new tricks and they're learning these new trades and learning very fast. I mean, if you see, Indian CFOs are, I think, the brightest of lot in the world.
Okay, would have been a good note to end on, but let's talk about the future in any case, very quickly. So, we're talking about future skills and we're talking about how the CFO community is getting ready. So let's pick up on that and talk about what it will take to be completely future proof to the extent that you can be. Robert, the organization of the future, the finance organization and the role of the CFOs, how do you see that changing in the near term as well as the long term, and what should change more importantly?
Okay, ACCA has done a lot of research in this area, and one of our biggest pieces of research was the finance professional of the future. And we identified 7 professional quotients, which naturally includes the ability to deal with digital changes, technical and ethical skills. But one of the things that was really important that brought out was that, and other researchers has informed that, if the CFO is to take the leading role that they should take within the organization, they need to develop their emotional intelligence. So going back to basics, they need to be able to lead the organization and take the team with them. And despite all the digitization, the human-to-human contact and be able to persuade and communicate appropriately remains fundamental.
Right, and therefore you're saying is the biggest task and challenge before any CFO.
Yes, I think so, and particularly with regards to a traditional, I suppose, view of the finance profession.
Right.
No, and to add what just to build on, I think, and it's very fair that what is said, but I also believe that in today's time, and when I say today's time means the time which is a time of a disruption, it is not a time of a change. If I have to pick up that, what is the one role that CFO has to play? And if I'm given answer just to one role, and in my view, the only role that he has to play is to build the organizational resilience. And when I say organization, means that how do you prepare an organization which can withstand the systematic risk as well as adjust to a new risk environment? Because the reality is that in today's time, for a similar kind of a reward that you had in the past, today you have to take a much greater risk. And therefore, how do you actually educate your business managers and to take a manageable risk? These things, and what you were just saying, that these things are pretty challenging because none of us have been taught this. Okay, these are things that we have to learn of our own. And if I believe that CFOs who do not play that role or do not succeed in playing this role, I don't think that he will be able to ever create an ecosystem which will ensure that organization is delivering value on a sustainable basis to its stakeholder. So personally, if you ask me, today CFOs are in a zone where they need to learn something which they have never ever been taught, and they need to acquire
in a new climate of risk.
New climate of disruption.
I
don't say risk.
In some ways,
Risk. I would be very happy with the risk. The frightening thing is the disruption, because the way I think finance have evolved over a period of time since '97 till today, you have seen so many risks. So I think most of the finance professionals have now tuned themselves how to manage risk, whether it is an operational risk or a geopolitical risk or a climatic risk. Everyone has understood that piece, foreign currency risk and so on and so forth. But how to handle systematic risk, where something that happens in an environment which undermines your existence altogether, undermine your existence or undermine the existence of industry, or you diminish to a size which is irrelevant. What is it that you do? How you build organizational resilience? How do you see the anomaly and oddities in the horizon first and make organization to act on it? That is the biggest thing that probably CFO needs to learn and then teach back to the organization, in my personal point of view.
Right. That's a great point. Sachin, you want to go first?
Yes, thank
future.
you. Future. So they need to keep learning. I mean, they've learned data science, they've learned robotics, they've learned digitization, but tomorrow's already the leading organization CFOs, they are learning behavioral science, from data science to behavioral science. If I talk to a leading organization CFO, he is saying, and these individuals, that it is not, I will not come to know when the fraud has occurred. I will know when and where and how it will occur. You know, they talk about minority report, right?
Predictive.
The predictive. Those are the discussions they are having today. So this is such a vast field, and I think, as rightly pointed out by Rajesh, it is just not what you were taught, and I think thanks to ACCA building these newer curriculum and adding those, I think it will be very much required. So it's going to be very challenging. And towards the last, you know, say 5 years versus 10 years, you will be asking last 6 months versus previous 2 years, okay? It will not be more 5 years. Every 6 months things will change.
Okay.
In my view, if you look at it, the role of the CFO is fast becoming like a co-pilot to the CEO. I think that's what the expectation is becoming. I mean, one dimension is our traditional role, the controllership that will remain, the adherence to the regulation will remain, and I think more and more technical specialization will happen on that side. So one set of finance professionals will still do that, but then if you got 1 year in the CFO shoe, I think your dimension of understanding the organization, ability to communicate a strategy, ability to face different stakeholders, getting deeper into the business models. I mean, how do you analyze what we talked about, the multidimensional data to make sense and do a level forecasting? I think those kind of dimensions, where you're almost like a co-pilot to the CEO. I think that's how I see the future of the CFO role going.
Right. And Robert, last word. I mean, do you think, I mean, if you were to talk about the human side, right? I mean, do you think, how do people fortify themselves and become more able and capable in delivering to all these challenges that we've talked about?
Well, I think you have to see the opportunity in change, and these are really exciting times to be in this role. And when we talk to our youngest aspirant finance professionals, they don't want to post entries, and they don't want to do reconciliations, and they don't want to do spreadsheets. They want to do this stuff. So this is exciting time. So I think if you're not ready for the change, then maybe it's not the job for you. But if you really want to grasp the change, then get up there. It's your time.
Right, and that's a wonderful note to end on. Thank you all for joining me. We've talked about not just change, but it's disruption, and it's a very mighty, challenging world out there. And the finance professional is obviously leading the way and setting standards in ensuring that their organizations stay right on the top. That's all we have time for. Thank you very much for watching.